Yeah. Pete Wehner has a new piece for The Atlantic entitled The Motivated Ignorance of Trump supporters. And in it, he writes in part, quote, motivated ignorance refers to willfully blinding oneself to facts. It's choosing not to know. In many cases, for many people, knowing the truth is simply too costly, too psychologically painful, too threatening to their core identity. If they are presented with strong arguments against a position they hold, or compelling evidence that disproves the narratives they embrace, they will reject them. Doing so fends off the psychological distress of the realization that they've been lying to themselves and to others. It's one thing to embrace a conspiracy theory that's relevant only to you and your tiny corners of the world. It's an entirely different matter if the falsehood you're embracing and promoting is venomous, harming others, eroding cherished principles, promoting violence, and subverting American democracy. A generation from now, and probably sooner, it will be obvious to everyone that Trump supporters can't claim they didn't know.
They can't claim.
This is incredibly powerful.
Yeah.
Amanda, take it away. I mean, this to me is the fear I have about Trump's stranglehold on our democracy is that it's a cult.
I want to intervene here and say, as I was listening to this a while ago, it reminded me of the so-called church world over here in America that has tried to pull the wool over the rest of the world's eyes, that now we're seeing various leaders such as Putin and Kim Jong over in North Korea and other things going on worldwide that are now persuasively going in a negative direction. They talk about peace over here in America, but in reality, they don't want peace. And I continue to keep saying that because if they did, they would embrace the Windmill Ministries missions. I've never seen such people being so two-faced in my entire life. And I'm going to use an expression of this whenever I get through with this recording on the latter part of it pertaining to an event that I went to Sunday that really opened my eyes again towards how people can be people.
Yeah, listen, I'm not surprised that Peter got it exactly right in The Atlantic there, but I think it actually gets to the discussion about the RNC debate. And if you don't mind, I was practically jumping out of my seat. Listen, I am not a betting woman. I don't like gambling, but I would happily take the other side of James Carville's wager for the exact point that Donald Trump will not turn down an opportunity for confrontation. When it comes to messaging to his supporters, a presidential debate, even though it's the earliest one in history, is a huge opportunity to speak on the mass level. And I am almost certain, I will take the bet, that he will use it as an opportunity to reinforce the lies about Joe Biden that he has been actively telling. I mean, if you look at every big, sort of media opportunity, the CNN town hall he had earlier this year, he uses it to do a few things. One, reinforce the 2020 big election lie. And number two, promote the lie that the Department of Justice is being unfairly weaponized against him by, puppeteer Joe Biden. The Biden campaign better be preparing for Trump to directly confront him about that. Because as you noted, Mika, no one understands how to play to the cameras like Donald Trump. Yes, his microphone may be muted, but he is going to go hard at him and try to use the power dynamics of that stage to knock Joe Biden off his game. And I wouldn't be surprised if he also hits him in the gut with the Hunter Biden stuff. I mean, the GOP understands that gets to the heart of Joe Biden. And I just don't think there's any chance that Donald Trump says, you know what, I'm not going to use that opportunity that is laid before me to directly reinforce those lies to his supporters.
Yeah,
stand back and stand by.
Exactly, and he does. I mean, he is a disruptor, and he is going to figure out. You can cut off the microphones. You can do whatever you want to do. He is a disruptor. He doesn't really know the facts of the issues well at all, so he has to disrupt. He has to shock. He can. It's like your father wrote about the Soviet Union. They can't play by the rules. They can't play by the rules that America plays by, because the old Soviet Union was inferior intellectually, they were inferior militarily, they were inferior economically, they were inferior politically, they're inferior in every way. That's Donald Trump. He cannot debate Joe Biden on the merits. So he's going to be a disruptor, and the Biden team better be prepared for Donald Trump to walk. I mean, what would a disruptor do? Okay, you're going to cut off my microphone. I'm going to walk over to your microphone and I'm going to get in your face. I'm going to confess. He could do that. He could do, like, imagine the 10 most disruptive things that Donald Trump could do. And he's going to probably do those very things because he doesn't play by the rules. And if the Biden camp goes into this thinking he's going to play by Marcus of Queensberry rules, they're going to be shocked, and the night is going to end badly for them. So Mike, I wanted to go back to Pete Wehner's excellent column in the Atlantic, because there's been hand wringing through how do we understand the Trump voters? Well done. What do we need to understand? What is this about? This is the forgotten working class man and woman. This is blah, blah, blah. At this point, this is about people, as Pete says, who are knowingly supporting a guy who has spewed authoritarian talking points, a guy who lies repeatedly, a guy who twists the facts, bends the facts, lied about the last election. And Pete, I wrote it down. He talked about how they don't like strong, if they're presented with strong arguments, compelling facts, they'll push away. I would say it's even more than that. They are allergic to basic facts. Donald Trump lies all the time. They are allergic to, let's take the big lie, for instance. They know, Mike Johnson knows it's a big lie. Lindsey Graham knows it's a big lie. They have 63 federal judges and courts that said, this is a big lie. They had a Supreme Court that said, United States Supreme Court that said, this is a big lie. They know. With even Republican officials saying, from Georgia to Michigan, this is a big lie. They know it's a big lie. So what do? They go to websites that are funded by Qatar, or TV networks funded by Qatar, are funded and run as sort of a front for a Chinese religious cult. They know what they're doing. Yeah. Mike, at this point, the gig is up. They know exactly what they're doing. They're spreading lies in support of a guy who wants to be an authoritarian leader.
Pete came up with a marvelous phrase in that piece, motivated ignorance. And the motivated ignorance of Donald Trump has been a lifetime habit. A lifetime habit. He's been operating on motivated ignorance since he's been 17, 18 years of age. He did it all through his business career, all through his life, nearly.
I want to say something, weigh in on what they're talking about here. First of all, Donald Trump is a marketing genius whenever it comes to him being able to persuade banks and contractors and etc. in going his way, that he's going to be able to do what he says that he's going to do. Bill Clinton was the same way. Bill Clinton could convince you that you could buy a rotten watermelon and put it in your car, and before you got home with it, it would taste good. There's certain people out there that has the knack of being very, very persuasive, especially under certain circumstances. Right now, the circumstances has built tremendously pertaining to both parties, in both parties reneging in observing the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help them God. So there was a commentator on TV yesterday, or last night, that I barely had the opportunity of watching, that made the same case, that if these parties know that these individuals that they have in there, regardless whether it be Biden or Donald Trump, are inadequate and insufficient to what the people actually need, then what exactly what exactly is their motive in continuing on with this basic circus that's going on? What is their motive? And I'm going to tell you right now, I've got a very, very empty, bad feeling about all this pertaining to their motive. And, you know, I would like to say that I think that Donald Trump can see through all this, and that it's probably going to take some sort of authoritarian man of God to be put in there by God to be able to straighten this problem out. But the fact of the matter is, our politicians, as well as our preachers, will be held responsible to the fullest extent of the law, and if not in this lifetime pertaining to the man-made laws and the laws of God, they will be held accountable for what has went on here in the past 30 plus years. Now, they can brush it up, they can paint it up, they can camouflage it all they want. They can try to distort it, they can try to re-image it all they want. But the bottom line is, our America, pertaining to the people that's in charge of our lives, have messed up. Whenever you're $30-something trillion in debt and you got all these problems that you're facing, that has been building, and now the people are beginning to awaken towards seeing the problems, you have obviously made some very, very horrible, bad decisions. Just like prior vice president said on national TV that mistakes have been made. And Pence knows mistakes have been made, but to pinpoint exactly when and who and where those mistakes was made, you probably won't get none of them to admit to that, because if they do, they're going to basically be cutting their own throats, and they know it. So this is what the American people needs to expect from now until the actual election. And to be quite honest with you, even after the election, it's going to be just as chaotic as what it is before the election. If somebody is thinking that somebody is going to be able to wave a magic wand over the American people's problems and them all mysteriously go away, they themselves is in a different reality than the real reality.
On by a bunch of Trump-loving Republicans. And that's what made them think, as I've reported, say, you know what, when we meet with this guy in a debate a year from now, we don't want a crowd. The other part of that is because the Biden team really wants this to be, as much as it can be, a policy-focused debate. And they feel like, well, Donald Trump will fall short in trying to discuss policy, or he'll reveal policies that are out of step with the American people. So the Biden team certainly feels good about the fundamentals, about the setting of this race. But you're right. We have seen Trump in debates before at times deliver strong performances. In 2016, the Republican primaries, he was unquestionably the star and winner.
In other words, everybody knows that a mistake has been made. Everybody knows that the American people are staring down the barrels of trouble and despair. But nobody is willing to come up with not only a solution to the problems, but nobody is willing to come clean pertaining to the originality of the core of problems. And because of it, it will only fester and boil and get worse.
He doesn't need to practice at all between now and the debate. He can just walk out there.
We're going to go forward right here a little bit. Hang on. Hang on. Hang on. Hang on.
Today, he met with President.
This particular recording here is a very inspiring one, to say the least, pertaining to NATO. And I want you to listen very, very carefully to what he says, but more so than what he says, listen to how he says it. Okay? Please listen.
White House, and we'll speak with him live in just a moment. His trip comes ahead of next month's NATO summit, set to be held in Washington, where the war in Ukraine will once again be the main focus of the gathering. NBC News Chief International Correspondent Keir Simmons has an update on the war and how it's being viewed inside Russia.
President Putin doubling down on war. He will visit North Korea, meeting with Kim Jong-un, who has supplied Russia with weapons, declaring last week he would agree to peace, but only if Ukraine meets maximalist demands like giving up territory. That was condemned by world leaders at a peace summit in Switzerland this weekend, mostly recommitting to supporting Ukraine in its fight. Putin's confidence stems in part from the backing of many Russians. On the streets of Moscow last week, this Russian man told NBC News, "Peace with Ukraine? Now? Only on our terms." This woman's view repeated again and again. Any war ends with peace talks, but I don't think there was anyone to talk to at the moment. Opposition in Russia has been crushed, but the only independent polling organization tells us most Russians want peace, but don't want to lose.
They don't want to be at a loss after all the victims and all the losses.
And says Russia's new war economy has even been a boost for some.
People do think the war is something bad, but it helps in some respects. It helps families to level up their income and their social position.
And I've said that all along pertaining to war. In every war, you can look at World War I, you can look at World War II, there was a silver lining to war pertaining to getting people back up and going again, getting them motivated towards one particular goal, and basically opening up factories and getting people working and developing things to where people can draw some sort of a paycheck off of. But look at what they're doing to do that. It's human destruction. It's human catastrophe. It's violence. It's hostility. It's cruel and indifferent. Look what it is motivating them to actually get this silver lining. And the thing about the silver lining, you can get the silver lining in more ways other than just war. People can pull together, people can build together, and people can enhance and basically utilize their services to where it will be better for not just that particular country or that particular nation or that particular body of people, but basically looking at the whole, all. And until I see true evidence that that is occurring, the only other aspect that I have is to look at everything going on from a world perspective and say, you know what? It's only going to get worse. It's only going to get worse. You know why it's going to get worse? Because you don't have the spear of the head of actually motivating the concept of a civilized civilization. Oh, you can talk about peace all you want, but listen to what this individual says about war versus peace.
The agony on the front lines, with hundreds of thousands dead, is a long way from most of Russia, while it has been lived by Ukrainians every day since Putin's illegal 2022 invasion. At this weekend's peace summit, US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan vowing to keep supporting President Zelensky.
What this summit has done is define what the core character, the core foundation of that just peace looks like. That no nation should be allowed to conquer another nation by force, period.
But important US partners and allies like Turkey, India, and Saudi Arabia refused to sign up to a final communique that, NBC News has learned, left out earlier proposals of talks with Moscow. One South African official told us, you don't achieve peace through war, just more war. Both Ukraine and...
What did he say? What did the guy
don't
say?
achieve peace through war, just more war.
Listen to it one more time.
One South African official told us you don't achieve peace through war, just more war. In both Ukraine and Russia.
And this is true. Just more war. That's all you achieve. Now, is there a silver lining to war? Yeah, there is. In a pathetic, perverted, distorted way, yeah, there's a silver lining to war. It gets people off their tails, and it motivates various societies towards basically going after one particular goal. To have war, just to have war, is not only senseless, but it's cruel and it's unhumane. The only way to justify war is if somebody declares war on that particular body of people or that particular nation. Then it's justifiable in going to war. But as of right now, what we're seeing coming out of the Russian government, that is now obviously persuaded a great deal of their citizens that this is going to be a good thing because it's getting people back motivated towards working again and helping balance their budgets. What we're seeing is not motivated around peace and love and prosperity, but what we're seeing is motivated around evil, something that is bad. And that's the same thing going on right now over in the Middle East. I have never seen so much humanitarian horrors that has been witnessed just within the past 6 months since the ordeal set in over there with Hamas and Israel. I've never seen so much heartache and so much chaos that I can't even begin to remotely exchange my feelings towards how heartbreaking that all these events have been. But yet now, the founder of the Windmill Ministries Missions here at 291 Thompson Road, Sharon, Tennessee, zip code 3255, can still not get not one letter, can still not get one text, can still not get one email, can still not get one visitor that comes by and says Dennis or Juby, whichever word they want to use. My legal name is Dennis. My incorporated name is Juby, pertaining to my nickname. Juby, we stand with you, and we stand for the things that you stand for, and you can call on us at any given time for us to be there. Have I gotten any type of conversation from any individual around here such as that on that degree? No. Not only from the citizens, but also from the officials. And that's one of the reasons why that I point my finger directly in Dresden, Tennessee, and various authorities, regardless whether it be mayors or governors or townsmen or whatever, that's got the authority to do this, beginning in Kenton, Tennessee, over in Obion County, that still to this day has not seen any positive results from. A matter of fact, if anything, what I have witnessed is a group of people that is associated with their authoritarian affairs pertaining to the authorities over in Kenton, regardless whether it be just a deputy or a mayor or somebody that works for the council, the city council, or over in Martin, Tennessee, or Dresden, Tennessee, or Greenfield, Tennessee. What I have seen is them to get sweaty palms and very, very nervous just because I'm observing what they're doing. I'm questioning why they're doing it. In other words, I'm micromanaging these problems that have recently not surfaced, but recently people have taken a great deal of concern about, that people such as myself, whenever they see me observing them, they get very, very nervous. And this is one of the key points that I tried to make to the people up here in Dresden, Tennessee, especially after Johnson decided to do what he done towards basically entrapping me after my brother had died, and basically using that as a tool, weaponizing that as a tool for their benefit up there in Dresden, Tennessee, that why in the world would a group of people become so nervous of an individual that come back to his home county and put up a sign pertaining to a rehab or some sort of a positive note towards getting people off of drugs and alcohol? Why would they have gotten so nervous because of an individual that had good intentions? It leads me to believe that they themselves are part of the problem, because they, in actuality, only talk about peace, but in reality don't want peace, because they know that if there truly was an agape peace, that would dismantle a great deal of their services pertaining to their courts, attorneys, prosecuting attorneys, defense attorneys, judges, and probation officers, and etc. So my point is this: they're full of you know what up there in Dresden, Tennessee. My point is this: they're full of you know what over there in Kenton, Tennessee. My point is this: they're full of you know what over there in Martin, Tennessee, pertaining to Mayor Brundage over there, that basically had me dismantled from Central Baptist Church just because he picked up on a bunch of rumors and misguided information. They're full of it. Please listen to this.
In Europe is that President Putin has to realize that he will not win on the battlefield. His aim is to control Ukraine, and we need to support Ukraine in a way that convinces him that he has to sit down and accept that Ukraine remains a sovereign independent nation. And therefore, military support to Ukraine is actually the way to ensure that there's a lasting peace in Ukraine, where Ukraine continues to be a sovereign nation.
Mr. Secretary General, we had Admiral Stavridis, who knows a thing or two about NATO, on with Jonathan Lemire earlier. And he was talking about how Vladimir Putin has ended up being the biggest promoter of NATO, in that, of course, NATO has expanded, more powerful than ever before, and also talked about the individual countries that are all that most of them are now putting 2% or more towards their defense budget. Long ago, but something very few did until after the invasion of Ukraine. Talk about the strength of NATO today.
Well, what we have seen is that NATO allies since 2014, because that was actually when this war started. That was when Russia illegally annexed Crimea and took control over eastern Donbass. So since then, NATO allies have implemented the biggest reinforcements of collective defense in decades, not least European allies.
Exactly.
And yesterday we published new figures, showing that 23 allies will this year meet the target of spending 2% of GDP on defense. That's actually up from only three allies in 2014 when they made the pledge, and it's a doubling over the last 4 years. So this is significant, and it demonstrates that European allies and Canada are really stepping up, reducing the burden on the United States.
Secretary Stoltenberg, this is arguably, among the 32 NATO nations, their finest hour in adhering together cohesively against the onslaught of the Russian invasion. But my question to you is, among those 32 nations, what do you think is the level of apprehension for a potential return of Donald Trump to the presidency?
Well, NATO is the alliance of 32 different countries with different political parties in power, and we are from both sides of the Atlantic. So I think the strength of NATO is that, despite differences, we have always been able to unite around our core task to protect and defend each other. And I expect that to be the case for the United States, that the United States remains a strong ally, partly because this is in the national security interest of the United States, partly because there is strong bipartisan support for NATO in the United States, and also because the main criticism from former President Trump and others has not mainly been against NATO, but it has been against NATO allies not spending enough money on NATO, and that
Exactly.
has significantly changed
Exactly.
over the last years. So I think we have a much better story to tell about the European allies and Canada really taking their share.
Exactly.
So, Mr. Secretary, in just a few weeks' time, NATO will hold its annual summit. This time it's 75th. It will be in Washington. As Mike mentioned, it comes amidst a series of elections, both in the United States and elsewhere in other member countries. Ukraine will be front and center, but tell us a little, if you will, what else will be on the agenda during this very important meeting?
It will be Ukraine, but also deterrence and defense, the importance of investing more as NATO allies do, but also the fact that China matters for the security of all NATO allies. Before, it was the idea that NATO was only about Russia or the Soviet Union, and then China was not something that we need to be concerned about. We see in Ukraine that that's wrong. China is the main country propping up Russia's war efforts in Ukraine, and therefore China matters also for European security. We see that
Now, these are facts that he's rattling off right here. Please listen.
Or will we sit North Korea is receiving a lot of support from North Korea. So what happens in Asia matters for Europe, and what happens in Europe matters for Asia. And therefore, if Putin wins in Ukraine, it's not only a win for him, it's also a win for President Xi and for North Korea and Iran. They want to see us fail, and we must, as NATO allies, prevent Putin from succeeding in Ukraine.
NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, thank you very much for coming on the show this morning. We appreciate
Thanks,
it.
Marsh.
All right, coming up, House Speaker Mike Johnson visited Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago yesterday as the two plot a path to victory for Republicans in November. We'll talk to Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries about Trump's potential impact on congressional elections and the work being done by Democrats to flip the House. Morning Joe will be right back.
We're going to go forward right here. And we're going to go through a great deal this next session until the very last part whenever they're talking about something that interested me very, very much. This is all politics.
Well, the climate.
Back up just a little bit. Right there.
Still ahead on Morning Joe, we're going to take a look at the dangerous heat wave. Temperatures in some areas soaring to 25 degrees above average at this time of year.
And you know, Mika, this is going to be another record-setting year, most likely, as far as heat goes. And you look at what's happened over the past 20 years. At what point will the climate deniers understand
What is going on?
that we are facing an existential threat here?
We'll be right back.
First of all, the true noble climate deniers will never admit that they was incorrect or wrong. That's just part of their narcissist of believing in themselves and bragging about themselves. But I want you to listen to this that's fixing to come up pertaining to the environment and weather. And I've tried to express and explain to people again and again and again that these heat domes that they keep talking about is releases of heat that's coming from the soil, from the ground, that's coming out of the ground because of the distraction of all the oil that was put there for a heat shield, that once the world, inside the world, that rolls and tumbles around kind of like a marble, that once that ball of fire that's 10,000 degrees plus gets to one side or the other,
To see
it will escape in whatever areas that it's leaning in towards, because that will be the area
with over
that will be the weakest, that will release the heat that's coming from the core of the earth. Now, I realize by me saying this, it's based basically on a theory more so than a fact. But the thing about it is, God has showed me these things not to frighten people, but for people to be aware that these are the things that are occurring that are only going to intensify and get even worse unless there is a complete 180-degree turn towards us stop draining the precious resources from the ground and putting carbon dioxide up into the upper atmosphere. That is also another contributor pertaining to this abnormal forces of nature. There's all kinds of different repercussions from this that people don't even realize. And just one of them I'm going to throw out there real quick is pertaining to germs, bacteria, organisms that live in areas that's not supposed to be living there, because ordinarily it was supposed to have been so cold that those organisms basically was dormant or dead. And now, since it's warming up, that opens up a brand new venue towards that many more sicknesses, that many more possibly pandemics that's going to come out of that because of what we're doing to planet Earth and because of what we're doing to the atmosphere surrounding planet Earth. And until people awaken to this, I promise you, things is only going to intensifiably get worse pertaining to abnormalities or irregularities coming from the forces of nature that mankind is causing. Not God is doing this, but the devil himself is the very guilty party that basically convinced all these other mega oil industries that we can just drill and drill and drill and drain and drain and drain and keep draining, and it will just last indefinitely. In other words, there won't never be an end to all the oil or etc. Well, it may not actually be an end to the oil, but the repercussions that follows of draining that oil leads to catastrophes in 1,000 other different ways that obviously either scientists or them big mega oil tycoons didn't think about. That, as far as I'm concerned, what they have done is deservingly, respectfully, they need to go to jail because of. These mega big oil producing companies that basically have made more profits within the past 3 to 5 years, either during or shortly after COVID, they need to go to jail. Exxon, Valdez, Shell, OPEC, they need to go to jail. And of course, the main leader in all of that, the devil himself in disguise, is coming from Saudi Arabia pertaining to OPEC. Greed. Between greed, selfishness, and basically willfully wanting to be blinded, idiocy is going to be the destruction to humanity. Is going to be the destruction to humanity. And it is going to cause suffering untold. Just as the Bible talks about whenever these things start to occur. It's very clear in the book of Revelations, in the King James Version Bible, of speaking, woe, woe, woe be unto the inhabitants here upon the planet Earth, whenever you shall start to see these things occurring. And that's exactly what it means. And people did not take the Bible literally. People did not take what we was doing, pretending to draining the resources from the ground, literally. And even to this day, it's still nothing but a forest. It's still nothing but a front pertaining to people thinking that that if we just dibble dabble around with maybe going to electric cars or maybe going to other forms of energy, regardless whether it be wind, solar, or nuclear, that eventually all this is going to go away. It's not going to go away. It is only going to drastically get worse. And if you know anything about meteorologists and what they predict and what they're saying about the ocean temperatures and what they're saying, NOAA and the space station, what they're saying about the planet Earth warming up every year, again and again and again. These are not fables. These are not some sort of theories. These are not mythologies. These are real facts that people like Donald Trump is still in denial about. That people like Donald Trump is still in denial about. And it's really reached a very, very scary pivoting moment in not only America, but the world itself, because we can see these things only escalating. I think yesterday, it got, I think, 97 degrees in Chicago. O'Hara Field beat an all-time record for this early in June. So these heat domes are actually moving either further north or over to the west or over to the east that I have taken notice of. And what has brought my attention to all this is I got interested in a prophet called the Sleeping Prophet just north from here in Hopkinsville, Kentucky, Edgar Casey, that I got to studying pertaining to the core of the earth, the magna, that he actually thought that the poles would actually shift. I don't know that the poles are actually going to shift, but what we're doing, we are changing the formation of what's going on inside the planet Earth, and we don't even realize that by draining trillions and trillions and trillions of barrels of oil out of the ground every year. And whenever I talk about that you could take Grand Canyon and fill it all the way up to the brim, not just to the top of the Hoover Dam, but all the way to the top of the brim, probably a dozen or more times of all the oil that we have distracted from the planet Earth. I'm not exaggerating these things. You do that year after year, decade after decade, you're going to have problems. And scientists know this going all the way back to the late 70s, that went to the White House during Carter's administration and told the White House, these are the things that's going to occur if we continue to be on the same trajectory path that we're on. And the White House looked at them and said, get back with us whenever it starts to occur. In other words, they was questioning whether or not they was even going to occur. You keep in mind, these are the very things that even a prior vice president, Mr. Gore, that run for president, that the people in the state of Tennessee wouldn't even hold up their own man because they thought that the guy was loony. They thought that the guy had basically fallen off his rocker. And now we're seeing 20 plus years later, people like Al Gore and other scientists that has raised a red flag to this is absolutely 100% on the money. On the money. And I don't mean with honey. So whenever I make these videos and I put this information out to the public, I'm not doing it to frighten people. I'm doing it for an alert, an advisory. Please, whenever the Windmill Ministries Missions put out advisories in 2007 up here in Kentucky that there was going to be massive, major electrical disturbances, we wasn't doing that to frighten people. We wasn't doing that to try to threaten people. We was doing that to help people. Just like the advisory that went out in 2005 up in Davidson County in Nashville, Tennessee, going to the 43rd president, describing to him of a bloody road ahead. Of a bloody road ahead. That Homeland Security out of the field office in Nashville, Tennessee, took that and blowed it out of proportion, misinterpreted what the founder was actually trying to promote and why he was promoting it. And the next thing you know, I wind up in a Looney Tune house for 72 hours up in Davidson County that basically costed me my job, a good job that I was working for in Antioch, or down by Antioch, Tennessee, below Nashville, Tennessee, working for a big dealership down there. The same year, that dealership had to fold because of what went on pertaining to the bubble burst. We have seen problem after problem after problem with the banking institutions. We have seen problem with our car manufacturers. We have seen problem with them being able to cross all the T's and dot all the I's. And there's no doubt, right now, the airline industry is doing real well. They're seeing profits today like they've never seen. But also, what does that tell you about people not taking global warming serious? They're still getting on their airplanes because they have deep pockets, and they're still going to Rome and Italy and France and all these other places, and they're visiting places towards being tourists, or they're going seeing prior people that they know or loved ones or whatever, like it was just another day in the park. And in the meantime, you got all these chemtrails that these planes are destroying the ozone layer of. You're putting out that much more carbon dioxide into the ozone layer that is bringing that much more problems to planet Earth. And if it's bringing that many more problems to planet Earth, and not only what you're doing to the Earth, but what you're doing to the atmosphere of the Earth, it's also going to bring problems to the people on the Earth pertaining to the inhabitants. Please listen to what these people are talking about on this particular session.
I think it's time to head to Seaside Heights, New Jersey. A few minutes before the top of the hour, welcome back to Morning Joe. The official start of summer is hitting the U.S. hard this week, with over 70 million Americans expected to be under extreme heat alerts. According to the National Weather Service, a so-called heat dome is responsible for the heat wave currently rolling across the country, as temperatures could reach as high as 25 degrees above what is typical for this time of year in many areas, and it's June.
I actually had my uncle tell me Sunday, Father's Day, up in Paris Landing, that's 92 years old. He explained to me, because I stopped in there momentarily to just visit with him, because I know that he's getting older and older and older at 92 years old. And he expressed to me, he said, you know where the cold comes from, don't you, Dennis? I said, yeah, it comes from the North Pole and the South Pole. He goes, no, it comes from the ground and it comes from the trees. And that's what he's been taught, is that what generates coolness pertaining to our weather patterns. In some ways, maybe he's correct. But then again, whenever you have 10,000 degrees in the center of the earth that's now banging around like a marble and going from one side of the inside of the planet to the other side of the inside of the planet, and now because that oil has depleted, that heat shield has depleted to the point that whenever that ball of fire gets close to either one side or the other, you will feel the effects coming from the outside of the earth. Now, you can't see it. You can't see heat per se, but you can darn sure feel it. So whenever people get to expressing to you that these things aren't real, that tells me that they're in another time warp pertaining to a reality that is not real. Because we are affecting our lifestyles, and we are affecting not just the human life up onto the planet, but we're also affecting all other types of life up onto the planet too as well.
Out west, some parts of Arizona are expected to reach 109 degrees. In New York, Governor Kathy Hochul says the National Guard will be opening more than 500 cooling centers today. and warns, quote, "We are going to be seeing temperatures at levels we have not seen in our lifetimes," adding, "This could be a deadly event." And because of the rising temperatures, dozens of environmental, labor, and healthcare groups banded together yesterday to file a petition to push FEMA to declare extreme heat and wildfire smoke as major disasters, just like.
And there was another good thing that happened yesterday. I know this is changing course a little bit. Is that finally the people directed in our government here in America finally put out a warning, Surgeon General warning, that they're discussing towards putting out a warning. I don't think they've actually put the warning out yet, but they are opening up the door towards doing it, which I think is about 10 years behind where they should have already been, is putting out warnings about social media, artificial intelligence, all this data that is affecting the lives of our youth. That's driving a lot of them off into the abyss, and some of them even off into suicide. They're finally acknowledging that these new adventures that has been brought or thrown into our laps is very, very dangerous. And I've been trying to tell people that now for the past 3 years of telling them about how powerful that these algorithms are, and how that it can actually creep into the minds of good, sound children. We're talking about children that has developed. I shouldn't have used the word develop. Well orchestrated minds that are not yet developed, and because of all the junk that they can get a hold of out there, it can actually dismantle or warp their whole concept in how they think and why they think the things that they think. In other words, it can have a brainwashing or an indoctrination effect upon these children, and a lot of them can't handle the whole truth, nothing but the truth. So help us God. Because they have been raised up in this bubble of protection, that they had no idea that these things was actually occurring right here in our backyards. But once they get to reading this and looking at this, they realize, my God, the world really is evil. In which I've known that now, I guess, ever since I come into the world and I started acknowledging the things that was going on. Even, I think, my dad, James Robert Jackson, Bob, know that these things was getting proportionally out of hand. And that may have been the very reason why that he expressed very loudly to my first wife and I, whenever we first found out
Air filtration systems in schools.
Let me get back with this.
The heat wave continues. The record run of hotter and hotter years, summers, when it continues. I mean, these are, you look over the past 20 years, and I don't want to get this wrong, but the overwhelming majority of those years over the past 20 years have been the hottest on record. There's quite a run, and we've got to do what we can to reverse it. And by the way, a lot of the problems coming from China, a lot of the problems coming from India. The United States has made great gains over the past 10, 15 years on reducing greenhouse gases. But
we can't be the only one.
We can't be the only one. We've got to do more.
Still, I had how the White House is hitting back at those cheap fake videos of President Biden being spread across right-wing media. That discussion when Morning Joe returns in just 2 minutes.
And there's no doubt.
Important values, freshness.
In what our scientists have done in the past 30 plus years, as far as identifying these problems and trying to eliminate a great deal of these problems towards changing the automobiles from R12 Freon in their air conditioning to R134, and they have been, very supersized in taking your carbon dioxide coming from your exhaust and putting in catalytic converters, those things that's got a bunch of beads in it, and et cetera, towards trying to eliminate a great deal of those problems. Okay? But you keep in mind That's just on the automobiles. Do you have any idea how many big pieces of equipment are out there running 24/7, regardless whether it's Caterpillars or whatever, that don't have those catalytic converters? Those airplanes that leave those chemtrails, they don't have catalytic converters. They're just now starting to develop something on 18-wheelers that's helping to change some of the emissions going up into the atmosphere. But that has been like 25, 30 years behind time pertaining to that. All these tractors, all these big pieces of equipment, as far as I know, unless I'm behind on times, they're still basically producing the same carbon dioxide up into the atmosphere as it was 35, 40, 50 years ago. As far as I know. I may stand to be corrected about that. I do know that the 18-wheelers has in fact changed, and out in California, a few years ago, they passed a law pertaining to 18-wheelers that wasn't even allowed to be on their roads out there unless they met EPA standards of what they expected. For, in other words, they had to take a great deal of those 18-wheelers that was good, sound pieces of equipment and basically put them into chop shops or basically melt them down and turn them into something else because they did not meet the proper requirements out in California. I don't know that it's got that steep yet on a national level. I do know that a lot of almost all the newer equipment coming out pertaining to your 18-wheelers does have smog and different types of eliminators on that. But what I was going to say a while ago pertaining to my dad is that my dad had the audacity to look at my first wife, Vicky, while she was pregnant, and you would have thought of all people that would have never ever said anything like this, it would have been the father to the grandfather of this particular child coming into the world, looked at us and begged us to abort the child. And then used this expression, well, how do you know that the child's going to be born normal? And then he goes back to his way of thinking. I guess that happened even way before the Revolutionary War over here in America, to where people was actually taking children that was born, and if they wasn't males, they knocked them in the head basically and killed them and buried them in the field somewhere. And he basically looked at my wife at that time and said, if the child's not born completely perfect, you just as well dig a hole and knock it in the head and bury it. Now, why would have an individual have said that about, at that time, and it still is, his only grandson, which is my son? Why would have a human being have said that to another human being about a grandyoungin coming into the world? So obviously something must have struck my dad in the wrong way. Maybe it was his concept in thinking or whatever, but something must have struck in him to the degree of thinking, my God, the world has gotten to the point that it's almost unfit to bring any human being into the world, much less my granddaughter or grandson. Because he did, and my ex-wife, which was my first wife, will verify that even my son to this day is fully aware that his grandpa made that type of statement. I would have never have made that type of statement over any child, but I do stand to the word of God that says, blessed are they in the last days who did not bear children, whose wombs was not basically giving out children, because of the harshness that's going to happen to the planet Earth, not because of God, but because of what the human race is doing to the planet. I will verify that is in the Bible, where Jesus said, blessed are the wombs that have never bare children in the last days, indicating that the world is going to become so bad pertaining to these extreme weather events that are actually going to bring so much displeasure to people's lives that it's going to come a time to where even Christ himself said, blessed are those who have not reared and bare children. Now that is a very, very powerful statement coming from not just a prophet of God, but from basically God's only begotten Son, which in reality was God. That's a very powerful statement that you can look it up in the King James Version Bible pertaining to the words of red, where Jesus said that. Matter of fact, let me just take just a minute real quick and see if I can Google it and see if it will tell me what scripture and verse that it's in. That way people won't think that I'm just imagining this. Let me see here. Where in the King James Version Bible did Jesus say, "Blessed are those who bear not children in the last days"?
According to Bible.com, Luke chapter 23 verse 29 King James Version, KJV, "For, behold, the days are coming, in the which they shall say, Blessed are the barren, and the wombs that never bare, and the paps which never gave suck."
Now that's in the book of Luke, the 23rd chapter, the 29th verse. That was God himself in the carnal flesh. But there was only one person worthy to open thy seals and to look upon thy books, which was the Lord Jesus Christ, that made a statement in reflection to the end time events that basically reads, "For behold, the days are coming." Now this was over 2,000 years ago whenever he was walking and talking amongst us, but he could foresee what was going to occur. "For behold, the days are coming in which they shall say, Blessed are the barren, the wombs that never bare, and the paps which never gave suck." That's exactly what that's talking about. It's talking about bringing children into a world that is so contaminated and so asphyxiated with pain and anguish and distraught, that the Bible expresses that the time is coming, which now is upon us. That was 2,000 years ago. Now it is, and it's even going to get more enriching as we go along, of seeing the cycle of these forces of nature that are going to become so unbearable. That's not just going to cause major electrical disturbances pertaining to our grid system not being able to keep up with it, pertaining to these irregularities, regardless whether it's super, super hot or super, super cold. But the time is going to come to where people will say, it's a blessing that you never bared forth any children. So maybe my dad, foreseeing this, and that was the reason why he expressed to me and Vicky, my first wife, that whatever you do, you don't need to bring a child into the world. You need to go ahead and abort it. Now, granted, I think he regretted making that statement after the years went by, because that was his only grandson, and he absolutely adored his grandson, and his grandson adored him, which naturally that's what it's supposed to be like. But there in the beginning, before he ever laid eyes on his grandson or granddaughter, he didn't know which one it was going to be. That was his mindset towards abort, get rid of the child. And I think that he could foresee then, which would have been 45 years ago, of how wicked and how cruel and insensitive that the people in the world was becoming, that's the reason why that he made that statement. Now, I can't verify that because he ain't here to defend his actions or what he said one way or the other. But the only thing that I can do is try to put my thinking in the right course of mind, because other than my dad losing his cool and flying off the handle because of what he went through during World War II, post-traumatic stress disorder, my dad was actually a very, very decent human being. He had a lot of good qualities about him, and he had a lot of love for his children, even though he may have went overboard in what's the word I'm looking for? In a displeasing way that people didn't understand. But in reality, he was doing that out of tough love because of the way that he was raised up, being born, I think, in 1926 or 1923 or something like that was whenever he was born, and basically was drafted in the World War II Army. And the only thing that basically saved his life going to the Battle of the Bulge is that he had an emergency medical problem that had to be addressed. You know, God himself, the Bible says, works in mysterious ways. God himself has never tried to harm humanity. God himself has always put out warnings and advisories, either through his son Jesus Christ or through other prophets or messengers of God towards warning people ahead of time for their benefits. Prepare. Not because of anger, not because of fear, but because of love. The world has become so upside down in not understanding the true concept of love. Sacrificial love, agape love, is true at heart of being the only true love. Now, there's artificial loves, there's camouflage loves, there's all kinds of lust, but whenever it comes to true sacrificial love, agape love, there's only a few that still remain upon to the planet that has these characteristics. I just want to say, I have tried endlessly out of the video material that I have put out again and again and again. And I know once you hear it again and again and again, it starts sounding like an old record, or it starts sounding like the little boy that cried wolf. Well, the little boy's been crying wolf now for about 40 to 50 years. What Mr. Ford and the oil industry has done is going to be to our demise if we do not change our strategy immediately, more so than what we're doing, not just here in America, but all over the planet, because we are damaging the planet, and as we're damaging the planet, it's going to damage us. We have brought this upon to ourselves, and that's one of the reasons why the Bible talks about that in the last days Satan will come down in great wrath in exchange towards he knoweth his time is short. It is Satan that has polluted the minds of men and women out of greed and selfishness, that thought that they could just run with this forever and a day, and there wasn't going to never be no consequences in it. Like I said, you could fill up the Grand Canyon here in America all the way to the top of the rim several times, probably a dozen or more times, pertaining to all the oil, the trillions and trillions and trillions of barrels of oil that we're draining from the ground every day. And if we don't think that that's going to have a profound effect upon to the planet, we're only living in a crazy, distorted reality, because it is. And whenever they talk about these heat domes that's traveling from one side of the continent, or one side of the continental United States to the other, or up and down, it's not just here in the United States that's doing that. It's also doing that in other continents. That all of a sudden Europe will break out in a freaking temperature like they've never seen before. And we're talking about areas that really has never even had to resort to air conditioning, that now you've caught them unaware. And now all of a sudden these people are trying to live in 105, 115 degree temperatures that hasn't never had temperatures ordinarily up until now, up until maybe 92 to 95 degree temperatures. I don't know what that is Celsius. I think it's probably around maybe 32, 34 Celsius is what they was adjusted to. And now they're getting on up into the Celsius range of 40, 41, 42 Celsius. That's hot. That's hot. Especially in countries that have never had to deal with that type of heat. So whenever these climate deniers talk about these things towards us being some sort of a fictitious ideal, it's no longer mythology, my friends. It is real. This stuff is actually occurring as I sit here and talk pertaining to the weather variations or the irregularities that are happening on the planet Earth, these things are real, that are only intensifying, that NOAA and also other satellite material, as well as space agencies can verify are happening, not counting what our own meteorologists and our scientists can verify that are happening. And it's still being ignored. It's still not being addressed properly. So, I tend to wonder if maybe society is doomed. And I don't mean that to be boasting. I mean that because it's actually occurring right in front of our very eyes.
We reported on yesterday. Firefighters increased their containment of a large wildfire in the mountains north of Los Angeles on Monday after a weekend of explosive wind-driven growth along Interstate 5. This is called the Grapevine. The fire broke out as weather turned hot and windy in a region where grasses spawned by a rainy winter have long since dried out and easily burned.
Oh, scary seeing the sea there so close to that I-5 corridor. Now, in New Mexico, an emergency evacuation order was issued for the entire village of Ruidoso as the South Fork fire grew to more than 5,000 acres on Monday evening. The New Mexico Forestry Division and fire growth has been rapid with extreme fire behavior. The Red Cross set up an emergency shelter earlier this morning for those feeling their homes.
Now, one thing that I have noticed, and I really pray for those people in New Mexico, because there's so much underbrush and so much different regions that's basically perfect. I hate to use the word perfect, but perfect for a catastrophic disaster, because you can go down one valley and into another, and next thing you know, there's a whole settlement of people there. I noticed that in New Mexico quite frequently whenever I was up there adventuring into that area, especially north up towards Los Alamos, New Mexico, and up into that area, the Enchanting Circle, up around those areas. It was so pleasant during the time that I was there, but looking and seeing what type of environment that they had pertaining to all the forestry and stuff, it also has an element of danger. And that's what we're seeing, the element of danger. There was a reason why that Christ himself said, flee into the mountains whenever you shall start to begin to see these things starting to occur. There was a reason why God himself warned his people by saying, flee into the mountains. There was a reason why that God himself said, blessed be those who bear not children, are barren of the wombs that never bear, and the paps which never gave suck. There was a reason why that God expressed himself this way. And it wasn't to harm us, it was to warn us, to help us. Please, if you get a hold of this particular video, I just pray for the inhabitants here upon to the planet that they will awaken before it is too late. Because these climate deniers, regardless whether it's Donald Trump or whoever, are basically just leading us down a path of destruction. Basically leading us down to the mouth of the volcano. And because they're walking off into the mouth of the volcano, I refuse to walk off into the same volcano. Now, there may be other dangers in my life that I can't foresee just yet, but this is one of them that I can foresee, and I can do like I'm doing right now towards producing video content by helping to express myself, of telling people again and again and again. And I realize that it sounds like the little boy crying wolf. Oh, we've heard that before. Oh, we've heard them say before that the end times is here. We've heard them say before that the last days is here. The last days is here. No, my friends, the last remaining final days are really here. And if you can't understand that and accept that, that's no longer a burden upon myself, because I have done my part by putting out the message towards being the messenger of telling people about what's to occur.
All right, here's a look at Duluth, Minnesota. Much more gray than yesterday.
Yeah. Of storms. It produced wind gusts over 60 miles per hour. We had some downed trees, some power outages, also quarter-size hail. Those thunderstorms have weakened dramatically, but I want to point out we still do have this cold front that is, let me find right around in here. Let me turn on my drawing tool. Right around in here. Now, this front's coming eastward. You'll notice out ahead of it, we have southerly flow, due southerly flow, bringing in what? Heat and humidity. Later on today, thunderstorms will fire up along this boundary.
And anytime you bring both of those contents together, those elements together, you're going to have some problems.
Thunderstorms are going to be severe. Let me show you where we're going with this. Here's where we are now. Watch those thunderstorms erupt. Now, before I get to them, I do want to point out this zone in here across Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. There's enough moisture and enough heat. There's going to be some widely separated thunderstorms here. There could be some gusty winds with those, but they're few and far between. Most areas are going to be rain-free. The main action is back out in here from Minneapolis toward Omaha as we head toward 5, 6 o'clock. Also watch yourself in central parts of Kansas. Delays, we're going to see lots of those with those thunderstorms. So if you're flying out of Minneapolis or Des Moines, or let's say not Des Moines, Omaha, I would do so this morning. By 5, 6 o'clock, all bets are off. Those thunderstorms are going to be nasty with some wind and hail and some locally heavy rain. Thunderstorms coming across the Des Moines area with perhaps some damaging wind gusts later on tonight. This northern area weakens, but what's going to happen is on the southern side of this front is going to start stalling out across Kansas. And watch what happens. You're going to get repeated showers and thunderstorms along this boundary later tonight and tomorrow morning. So there could be some flash flooding. It's a wet next 24 hours around the Omaha area. There's the zone that we're worried about severe weather along I-35 from Duluth toward Minneapolis. Even down toward Des Moines, you're going to get in some severe weather late.
Now you keep in mind that just yesterday, that heat dome that they're talking about that was building, yesterday was 97 degrees in Chicago, or O'Hara Field registered 97 degrees in basically the first part of June. So we're not exaggerating whenever we talk about the irregularities pertaining to Mother Nature. We're not exaggerating. The planet is actually changing right in front of our very eyes. It's kind of like the frog theory of the boiling water, that if you throw the frog in the boiling water, he'll notice it all at once and he'll jump out before it kills him. But if you put the frog in the warm water and you turn it up gradually, a little at a time, the frog won't notice it until it's too late, and by that time, the frog is dead. That's the scenario that's happening with the planet warming up. And we're seeing this pertaining to the sorrows that even Christ talked about, that there would be major sorrows in the last days that would just be overwhelming to society. And maybe these was the things that my dad foreseen that we didn't understand at the time for him to make the statement that he made about his own grandchild. Good luck to all of us. Good luck to each and every one of us as we continue to get further and further into this. Like I said, there has been some tragic mistakes made just within the past 30 plus years that I blame personally the prior politicians and the prior preachers that wasn't on top of their game in understanding what was actually occurring. And now this thing has basically fallen into all of our laps, and now we're having to deal with it the way that we're dealing with it. But by denying it is not the proper way of dealing with it. Denial has never been a proper way of dealing with any type of addiction or any type of problem. And it never will, and it won't never will. You can't deny the things that are undeniable. You can, but there's going to be consequences in doing so. God bless America. God bless our troops. And heaven, God Almighty, please help us all. Thank you for listening. Good luck to each and every one of us. And once more, shalom.